Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the hands you once trusted most. In the heart of Burkina Faso, a nation built on courage and sacrifice, a $50 million scandal has erupted, one that did not come from foreign agents, not from Paris, Washington, or mercenaries in the shadows, but from within the very circle of men and women who once swore loyalty to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Money meant for children's classrooms, for hospitals, and clean water for roads that would bind a fractured land quietly disappeared. And when the lights went out across the villages, when mothers waited for medicine that never came, the truth was whispered like a curse. The betrayal came from within. For many, this could have been the end of faith. Another African revolution eaten by its own hunger for power. Another young leader crushed beneath the weight of corruption. But what followed in Ouagadougou would shock not only a nation, but the world. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré did what few leaders in any age have dared to do. He exposed his own. He placed integrity above friendship, justice above comfort, and the people above power. The question now echoes across Africa and beyond: can a leader confront betrayal at the highest level without bowing to pressure, without protecting allies, without losing the soul of his revolution? This is not just a story about stolen money. It is a story about whether truth can still triumph in a continent too often scarred by lies. It is the story of a nation standing at the crossroads of despair and rebirth. Stay with us. What you're about to hear is more than a headline. It's a test of faith, leadership, and the enduring will of a people who refuse to be defeated. Subscribe if you believe that Africa's future belongs to leaders who serve the people, not themselves. Share if you stand for integrity before loyalty. Because tonight in Burkina Faso, justice has a name, and it begins with Ibrahim Traoré. It began quietly, without gunfire, without warning, just a flash drive. On the evening of September 4th, 2025, as dusk fell over Ouagadougou, an unmarked envelope arrived at the door of Rad Omega, Burkina Faso's most resilient independent broadcaster. Inside that small piece of plastic lay the weight of a nation's conscience. 20847 confidential documents, wire transfers, payrolls, property deeds, and secret contracts. Each file told the same story: betrayal. Not from Paris, not from Washington, but from within the very government sworn to protect the people. Investigators soon uncovered the unimaginable nearly $50 million siphoned from public projects meant to rebuild a war-torn nation. Money for schools, hospitals, clean water, and electricity had found its way into private accounts, while children studied under trees and nurses treated patients without medicine. And the betrayal had names. 7 of the most trusted officials, the very men and women who once stood beside Captain Ibrahim Traoré on podiums, who raised their fists for sovereignty, were now at the center of a criminal web. Colonel Borma Sanfo, Minister of Territorial Administration and Traoré's childhood companion, had allegedly diverted over $12 million meant for rural electrification. Entire villages celebrated with songs when told solar panels would soon light their homes. Years later, the darkness never left. Dr. Fatou Kampi, Minister of Economy and Finance, reportedly stole $9 million from infrastructure funds. Roads that existed only on paper, bridges that led nowhere, budgets inflated to 5 times their value, all traced back to her accounts. Major Ibrahim Traoré, head of presidential security, was accused of stripping $6 million from military procurement at the very moment soldiers on the front line fought with outdated weapons. Ouminat, true Minister of Social Action, allegedly took $5 million from humanitarian aid ghost invoices for food books and medicine that never arrived. Colonel Amadou Adrago, Director of Intelligence, not only pocketed $7 million, but used state resources to spy on the president himself. Dr. Resman Kabari, Minister of Health, linked to $5 million missing from medical budgets, warehouses discovered full of hoarded supplies owned by his private companies. Professor Salif Dio, Minister of Education, seized nearly $5 million from school building funds. 67 schools were recorded as completed, yet 12,000 children still studied under trees. These were not faceless bureaucrats. They were family to the revolution men who dined at the same table, who once pledged to cleanse Burkina Faso of foreign greed. The numbers were staggering, but the human cost was far greater. A 34-year-old teacher named Sarah Kabore wept as she spoke to reporters. "We were promised a new school, new books, better pay. 3 years passed and nothing came. Now we learn the money was stolen." How do we explain this to our children? In the rural province of Kudugu, Ibrahim Wedo, a 67-year-old farmer stared at the unlit horizon where power lines were supposed to rise. "This is worse than colonialism," he said bitterly. "At least the colonizers admitted they were stealing. These men pretended to serve us." Across the nation, disbelief spread like wildfire. In cafes, mosques, and crowded markets, people whispered the same question: how could this happen under a leader who promised a new dawn? Burkina Faso was already fragile, millions displaced by conflict, its economy strained by sanctions and drought. Every stolen dollar was a wound carved into the nation's soul. It was food taken from the hungry light, stolen from villages, dignity stripped from a people still healing from war. By dawn, the scandal had crossed borders. News agencies from Lagos to Paris splashed headlines, "Corruption strikes at the heart of the revolution." But inside the presidential palace, there was silence, no speeches, no denials. Only the quiet realization that the battle for Burkina Faso's future would not be fought on the battlefield, but within the government itself. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the betrayal was personal. The thieves were not enemies. They were brothers, and as he would soon declare, they ate the bread of our people while our people starved. The revolution that once united the nation now faced its greatest test not from foreign invaders, but from the cancer of corruption within. Captain Ibrahim Traoré first heard the whispers of betrayal not from journalists, nor from foreign spies, but from his own auditors. It was August 28, 2025, when a Chinese engineering team flagged a shipment of solar equipment supposedly delivered months earlier, but nowhere to be found. Days later, Russian humanitarian partners raised similar alarms about aid funds gone missing. Patterns began to form. The numbers didn't add up. At midnight, Traoré made a decision that would change everything. He refused to trust his own cabinet. Instead, he called upon investigators from Mali and Niger, brother nations within the Sahel Alliance. Within 72 hours, the truth lay bare. Nearly $50 million, the lifeblood of Burkina Faso's reconstruction, had been siphoned by the very people entrusted to defend it. Witnesses say that when the captain received the report, he did not speak for nearly a minute. Then he stood, his face pale with disbelief. "These are not enemies," he said quietly. "They are brothers who ate the food of our people while our people starved." 3 days later, on September 1st, he summoned all 7 accused ministers to a private meeting inside the presidential palace. Cameras were banned. Only a handful of witnesses were present. But what transpired that day would become legend. According to leaked audio, later verified by multiple sources, Traoré began calmly holding a file of evidence in his hands. "You have destroyed 3 years of work in 3 months of greed," he said. "You have stolen not just money, but the trust of our people and the soul of our revolution." When he presented the documents, bank transfers, signatures, receipts, the ministers protested. They called it a setup, a Western plot designed to break African unity. "This is the work of foreign intelligence," one of them shouted. "They want to divide us?" Traoré slammed the table. "These are your signatures. These are your accounts. Are you saying the CIA forged your handwriting and created fake bank records?" Silence filled the room. No one answered. But rather than surrender, the accused launched a desperate counterattack, a disinformation campaign they called Operation Clean Hands. They poured millions into social media propaganda claiming the scandal was fabricated. Fake villagers appeared in staged videos praising the accused. Paid preachers called the accusations an attack on Islam. Opposition politicians were bribed with promises of stolen money. Some officers were offered promotions to block arrests. And then came the most shocking revelation: Colonel Amadou Adrego, the intelligence chief, had used state surveillance systems to spy on the president himself. He had recorded private meetings, tracked family members, and even collected forged evidence meant to blackmail Traoré into silence. As panic spread among the elite, the streets of Ouagadougou filled with whispers. People feared the revolution would collapse under its own weight. Foreign media predicted the captain's downfall. Leaked memos from Western embassies described a plan named Operation Internal Collapse, a coordinated effort to amplify public anger, paint Traoré as complicit, and offer asylum to the corrupt ministers in exchange for political chaos. But the West had misjudged the Burkinabe people. In marketplaces and tea houses, citizens began drawing a line between the leader who exposed corruption and the traitors who caused it. Polls showed that over 70% of the population blamed the ministers, not the president. A young student named Amara Diallo, speaking to a reporter, said what many felt: he could have hidden this, like every leader before him. Instead, he exposed his own allies. That makes me trust him more. And the wave of support grew. Graffiti appeared on walls across Ouagadougou. Justice first. The revolution must survive. Then, in the early hours of September 6, 2025, the nation woke to the sound of boots and sirens. Operation Justice Dawn had begun. Military police swept across the capital and surrounding provinces. One by one, the 7 ministers were arrested, some from mansions stacked with cash, others at airports attempting to flee. For the first time in modern African history, high-ranking officials were publicly arrested and televised live. The images stunned the world. Colonels, professors, ministers, once symbols of power, now standing in handcuffs before their people. Crowds gathered outside courthouses. Some cheered, some wept. Many simply stood in silence, trying to comprehend what they were witnessing. Never before had an African leader prosecuted his own inner circle while still in power. What began as a scandal meant to destroy Ibrahim Traore had transformed into the ultimate test of his integrity, and a moment that redefined what leadership could mean for an entire continent. The arrests did not end the story, they began a reckoning. Across Burkina Faso, the echo of Operation Justice Dawn rolled through every market, mosque, and classroom. For many, it was the first time they had seen real accountability. For others, it was a wound reopened. In the weeks that followed, investigators revealed what the stolen millions had truly cost. The numbers were staggering, but the faces behind them were even harder to bear. In the education sector, government records showed that 67 schools had been declared completed, their budgets fully paid. But when journalists visited, they found only empty fields and crumbling mud walls. Over 12,000 children were still studying under trees, writing lessons in dust. Teachers, more than 300 of them, had gone months without pay, while ghost employees with fake names collected salaries. One of the accused, Professor Salif Dio, had hoarded school supplies and textbooks in private warehouses. Healthcare told a similar story. More than $5 million in medical funds had vanished. 23 clinics across rural provinces remained without beds, electricity, or medicine. Pregnant women were forced to walk miles to reach city hospitals. Children died from malaria simply because essential drugs never arrived. For many, the revelation felt like mourning. "We didn't lose money," one nurse said softly. "We lost lives." Infrastructure projects, once trumpeted as proof of progress, now stood as monuments of deception. Roads existed only on paper. 45 water pumps were installed, but never built. 80 villages had celebrated electrification ceremonies with speeches, flags, and banners, but no wires were ever laid. Every photo opportunity, every handshake, every ministerial speech had been a lie. As these truths emerged, public anger turned to clarity. For the first time, citizens separated their leader from his government. Their rage was directed not at the revolution itself, but at those who betrayed it. Murals appeared on city walls. "The people are watching." "Justice before friendship." "Traoré stands with us." Surveys conducted by the National Civic Institute showed that 89% of Burkinabe demanded harsh prosecution for all corrupt officials, while fewer than 10% believed Traoré should resign. For a continent long accustomed to impunity, this was revolutionary. But justice carried a cost. The scandal deepened the country's economic fragility. With over 2 million internally displaced persons, 1/4 of the population already dependent on humanitarian aid and foreign sanctions still in place, confidence in the state wavered. International donors, some supportive, others skeptical, paused to ask whether Burkina Faso could rebuild trust. In diplomatic circles, whispers grew louder. Some envoys called it a moral triumph, others warned of political suicide. Opposition leaders, quiet since the 2022 coup, began to re-emerge, arguing that the corruption proved the revolution's failure. Foreign commentators echoed the narrative, calling Traoré's transparency a gamble that may destabilize his rule. Yet among ordinary citizens, the sentiment was different. A market woman in Ouagadougou put it simply: "If he protects thieves, we are doomed. But if he punishes them, we can still hope." That hope began to reshape the national mood. The arrests inspired students, community leaders, and local volunteers to demand audits in their own districts. Civic groups began posting lists of ghost projects online. The fear that once silenced people was slowly replaced by a sense of ownership. Still, Traoré's challenge was far from over. The arrests had shattered loyalty networks that once held the military and political elite together. Power was now a vacuum waiting to be filled. Would justice unite the revolution or fracture it even further? In the corridors of power, uneasy eyes watched the young captain who had dared to expose his own. Some feared him. Others began to admire him. But all knew this truth: Burkina Faso could never return to what it was before. For better or worse, the nation had crossed a line. The age of silence was over. When the story broke, the world did not know what to make of it. For decades, corruption scandals in Africa had followed a predictable script: exposure, denial, silence, and collapse. But this one was different. This time, the president himself was the whistleblower. In Washington, analysts at the State Department and CIA initially saw opportunity. Internal memos later leaked by African intelligence described a coordinated plan called Operation Internal Collapse. Its purpose was simple: amplify public anger, paint Traoré as complicit, and quietly offer asylum to the disgraced ministers. One cable read, "The corruption scandal provides perfect cover for regime change. We can support anti-corruption forces while protecting our strategic interests." But something unexpected happened. Instead of imploding, Burkina Faso rallied. The people did not turn on their leader, they rallied behind him. A U.S. embassy report reluctantly admitted Traoré has turned the corruption scandal into a demonstration of integrity. Far from weakening him, it has consolidated his position. In Paris, disbelief turned into frustration. The French Foreign Ministry circulated a confidential assessment warning that Traoré is being praised for cleaning house, while other African leaders face criticism for shielding corrupt allies. His example risks inspiring a dangerous precedent across Francophone Africa. In London, a Foreign Office review reached the same conclusion. Instead of destabilization, this has produced consolidation. His government appears more competent, not less. Even Berlin acknowledged the shift. German advisors reported that several African governments had quietly approached them, asking how to replicate the Burkina Faso model of asset recovery. Meanwhile, the African Union was already moving. The AU's Commissioner for Political Affairs invoked CAPAR, the Common African Position on Asset Recovery, and offered full cooperation to track the stolen funds. Specialized courts were proposed to fast-track corruption trials. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa praised Traoré's courage, calling it a new standard for African leadership. Ghana's Nana Akufo-Addo declared, "Corruption is the enemy of African development, no matter who commits it." In Addis Ababa, the AU's headquarters leaders began to see the scandal not as a national disgrace, but as a continental awakening. For the first time, an African head of state had confronted corruption from within without waiting for lectures from Washington or Paris. Western think tanks, however, grew uneasy. Commentaries warned that Traoré's defiance could strengthen anti-Western sentiment and accelerate Africa's political realignment toward the global South. Editorials in U.S. and European outlets began questioning whether his radical transparency might embolden other populist reformers who no longer feared Western approval. And yet, even among critics, there was a grudging respect. An American journalist writing for Foreign Affairs summarized it best: "What we are witnessing in Burkina Faso is not chaos, it is evolution. A generation raised on injustice is learning to hold power accountable, even their own heroes." Across the diaspora, from Atlanta to Accra, from Paris to Port-au-Prince, voices rose in admiration. African Americans, Caribbean activists, and Pan-African thinkers saw in Traoré's actions something deeply symbolic: the possibility that Africa could heal itself. For Washington, the scandal that was meant to fracture the revolution instead revealed a deeper truth: that integrity is more destabilizing to old empires than corruption ever was. In the end, the global reaction spoke less about Burkina Faso and more about the world itself. Those who once lectured Africa about good governance were now watching an African nation lead by example. The betrayal of $50 million could have destroyed a fragile nation. It could have silenced hope-broken faith and ended the revolution that began in 2022 when a young soldier dared to challenge the old order. But instead, it revealed something rare in our time: the courage to confront corruption, even when it wears a familiar face. For the people of Burkina Faso, this scandal was not just about money, it was about stolen futures. Children without classrooms, mothers without medicine, farmers without light. And yet, through the storm, something remarkable happened. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not hide behind excuses or political convenience. He faced the truth head-on and made the impossible choice to cleanse his own house before demanding justice from the world. That choice changed everything. Projects once abandoned are being rebuilt. Clinics are reopening. Schools are rising from dust. Villages once in darkness are now preparing for solar installations. Each brick laid, each roof raised, each classroom lit stands as proof that the people's money has returned to the people. But rebuilding trust is harder than rebuilding roads. Traoré knows, as every honest leader must, that the enemies of reform are not only abroad, they sit within waiting for the next opportunity. History reminds us that revolutions do not die from invasion, they die from betrayal inside their own walls. And yet this moment feels different. From Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Harlem to Haiti, Africans and their descendants are asking the same question once whispered in the markets of Ouagadougou. If he can prosecute his own friends, why can't ours? That question's simple moral defiant is now echoing across the world. It terrifies the corrupt and inspires the free. For the elders of the African diaspora, this moment carries a deep resonance. They remember the promises of independence, the betrayals that followed, and the long years when integrity seemed impossible. Now they see a young captain daring to restore what was lost, not through speeches, but through action. Still, the road ahead remains dangerous. The storm of conspiracies, economic pressure, and foreign interference has not passed. The struggle is far from over. But perhaps that is the true measure of leadership, not perfection, but persistence. To rise after betrayal, to heal after heartbreak, to build again not for glory but for the people. So as this chapter closes, a new one begins. The world is watching. The people are waiting. And the question remains for all of us, will this be remembered as the moment Africa began to heal, or the moment the world turned away in silence? If you believe that integrity is the highest form of strength, share this story. If you believe that Africa deserves leaders who serve the people, subscribe and stand with us. Because the revolution for justice is not over. It has only just begun. New Africa. Africa rise. Integrity first.